Thank you, Dr. Bassill, for allowing us for that indulgence. And we're so happy to have you here today on edTrends.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Christy, for those great introductions. Thank you all for attending, and I'm going to share my screen and give a little presentation, and then follow that up with a little live demonstration of the tools that I'm talking about. So let me share my screen. Oh, you cannot share your screen while the other participant is sharing. So maybe you have to unshare and then I will share.
Should be set.
Okay, I'm still getting that, unfortunately. Okay, that works. Okay, let me. Okay, can you see my screen? Sorry, can someone just give me a yes? You can see my screen?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for being patient while I got this up here. I'm going to talk to you about some predictive tools that we can use to make school decisions a little bit better regarding weather and hazardous weather. Oops. So just to really get us started, I thought it'd be nice to look at a nice video of some snow. So this is actually from yesterday here in New York, from a spot in the Untitled Plateau where they're getting some lake effect snow. So it's early November. Here's about the time we start thinking about winter weather. And this video is courtesy of the New York State Mesonet, which I can explain in a little bit more detail as we go on. But it's a nice, pretty snow to get us all in the mood for talking about snow. So a brief background on what we do here, and that really comes down to the fact that we're a state-funded enterprise, and the idea is that we try to connect the local expertise, which at UAlbany, where we are all located at, is meteorology in large part. We have one of the best meteorology programs in the country. We have a great weather data set. I just mentioned that camera image from the New York State Mesonet. And we have a lot of other expertise. The National Weather Service is just about 100 feet behind me. There's a lot of great organizations we can talk to. So our expertise is weather, but it's not just weather in terms of the science behind it. It's also the what do you do with it? How can it be used to help improve people's lives in terms of better understanding weather? So where are we? They actually just built us a brand new $180 million building on campus. So we are all moved in here just as of a couple months ago. And actually a few of us are still moving in. I was fortunate to move in a little earlier than a few, but it's a great new building. All of us are co-located in one spot. So when I say all of us, there's about 4 or 5 different departments, depending on how you want to break things down, that touch weather in some way. And we're all at the same spot. We're right next to the Weather Service. It's really great. We can just walk down the hallway, talk to each other, pick each other's brains, and develop new tools together and do research together. So that's really exciting. I'm not going to dwell on any one here, but I just wanted to highlight the breadth of information and knowledge that's here in this building. So why are we? So I said who we are and where we are, but why are we? And really, the idea is most weather-dependent organizations don't have meteorologists. That's certainly true when it comes to schools. A high school is not going to pay for a full-time meteorologist on staff. That just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But even thinking much higher than that, might surprise you, but most utilities don't have meteorologists, and they have to deal with power outages all the time that are caused by weather. A lot of state agencies don't have meteorologists. The Department of Transportation spends $500 million per year, $500 million per year on winter weather, and they do not have a meteorologist. So there's a lot of opportunity to improve actions if you could really make use of the weather data that you have, if you were able. So we try to be that go-between. So honing in here on schools, they struggle with a lot of weather decisions, and sort of the obvious ones are opening or closing decisions. So, should they just cancel for the day, delayed start, early closing? But there's a lot of other ones that maybe aren't necessarily as obvious in terms of if you're a school that has recess. Oftentimes there are guidelines for we'll let the kids go out and play, but only if the wind chill is above a certain level, or if the heat index is below a certain level. There are lots of after-school sports that are outside, track and field, football, baseball, etc. And if the heat index is too high, or if it's lightning, strong winds, if there are outdoor graduations, you can imagine that these things are important to making those decisions. And so right now, there aren't really meteorologists who do that, and a lot of these decisions are unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, but put on the shoulders of superintendents or other sorts of if a school district is fortunate enough to have some type of emergency manager, which is pretty rare, they get put on those shoulders, and that's hard to coordinate across different schools, and they don't necessarily have the expertise to make these decisions. So we're trying to fit in where we can the weather data that will allow them to make those decisions. So how do we start? This project with schools actually got started from an early season snowstorm in 2018, and I'm going to use that as the basis for this presentation to start it as a motivating storm. So here in the capital region of New York, around the Albany area, snow began on the evening of the 15th. I think that was a Thursday, if I recall. Overnight, it was a really gross storm, snow mixed in with sleet and freezing rain, and then transitioned back to heavy snow during the morning commute. And a big factor was, when was the snow going to end on the 16th? We knew it was going to be really gross overnight. Travel in the morning might be hazardous, but was it going to go throughout the day? Should we cancel school? Should we not cancel school? Should we delay school? What should we do? So this storm is sort of the prototype for all of these kind of storms that help serve as a basis for us going forward. So while we were making those decisions up here in the Capitol, here's what was going on in New York City from the storm. And the storm hit New York City earlier on the 15th. It hit there during rush hour on the 15th, whereas it didn't make it up here until late evening on the 15th. So in New York City, traffic was brought to a standstill. Many people didn't make it home that night. They had to sleep in their cars, sleep at work. Lots of articles written about it. New York Times, Washington Post, lots of other articles. Just, hey, snow just paralyzed the city. So put yourself in the shoes of a superintendent up here in Albany, trying to decide whether you should close school tomorrow. You're seeing these kind of headlines. You're seeing on the news what happened in New York City. You see that the forecast is for snow overnight. Pretty easy decision to cancel school tomorrow, right? Maybe not. So we began this pilot project with Capital Region BOCES. And so here in New York, there's collections, I think there's 37 of them, but collections of school districts that kind of band together into functional groups. And the one that we began working with was Capital Region BOCES in the light blue there, obviously in the Capital Region. So this is kind of a map of all of the different spots. So I'm going to jump right to the products. And so really, if you're a superintendent or someone else making decisions, you need to have some sort of tool or location to rely on for weather data. And a lot of times what happens is that one superintendent might be looking at the local news. A different superintendent might be using their phone app. A third might be looking at the weather service. A fourth might be watching the news, but it's a different news. And so then they'll have a Zoom chat or they'll have a text chat and they'll say, well, I heard that the snow is going to be heaviest in the morning. And someone else will say, well, I heard that the snow is going to be, done by 3 a.m. And it's very hard for them to decide on the best course of action. And sometimes decisions made that maybe they regret later on. So really our mission here was, let's make a tool that is just a website that updates frequently, that anyone can go to at the Capital Region here, and it'll have some pretty easy to read maps or charts that just say, okay, here's where the snow is, or here's my timing of when it's going to be over. So obviously we didn't have this tool in real time, but we went back and we made it retrospectively from the models that would have been available at different times. And so what this map shows is a map of expected hourly snowfall for the Capital Region. So the Capital Region BOCES incorporates the 4 counties shown here outlined. And what the colors are how much snow is expected per hour. And basically where you see yellow, that's about 1 inch per hour. Where you see white, that's nothing. And then the other colors are somewhere in between. So this is what you would have looked at had this page been running at the time and you checked in, say before you went to bed around 10 o'clock. So you probably would have seen, if you're looking at the little tiles here, yep, heavy snow overnight, lots of yellows around the area, 1 inch per hour. And then it sort of drops off in the middle of the night, and then you're looking at tomorrow morning, yeah, maybe 1 inch per hour, 7 to 8 a.m., 8 to 9 a.m. But by the time you get to 10 to 11 a.m., absolutely nothing on that map. So not even a trace of snow. So we made a tool where you can kind of zoom into different counties, look at the school districts. It's the same data, just allowing yourself to look in a little bit in more detail. One thing I haven't really mentioned are these camera thumbnails. And so if you remember at the start of this talk, I showed a camera loop of some snow in the Tug Hill Plateau from the New York State Measurement. That's a weather network around the state that collects weather observations and has a camera at every site. So New York is lucky enough to have that, and so we can benefit from that by using that data here so people can also look at the camera image. People love to look at camera images to see what's going on outside, obviously. So I'll show an example of this in real time coming up, but if you're a school superintendent waking up at 4 a.m. and you want to see if it's snowing somewhere not at your house, it's nice to have a camera somewhere you can just click in and look at. So we also put all of this information into one sort of handy chart. And looking at this at first, you'd probably say, wow, that's really complicated. There's a lot going on there. But it's really not that complicated, and I'll walk through it step by step. And so again, this is the kind of thing that you would have seen if you were trying to make a decision for closing school or delaying school at next day for Albany County the night beforehand. So I'm going to walk through it step by step. On the left, there are several different types of weather. So basically, these are the things that you might care about if you're making a decision. Things like snowfall per hour, things like how much total snow is going to fall, things like freezing rain or wind chill. In this case, I'm going to highlight snowfall because that's the thing that we cared about in this particular event. So the way to read it is you would pick the type of weather you cared about. So let's say snowfall per hour. And then you'd pick the threshold you care about. So let's say if you're a bus driver, you would say, well, from my experience, if we get more than an inch per hour, the roads are awful. I can't drive the bus. So then you would say, okay, my threshold is 1 inch per hour, and I'm going to look at that. Then you would look at your time. So say that, okay, well, I pick kids up, that bus driver, and you'd say, I need to pick kids up between 6 and 7 a.m. or 7 to 8 a.m. So that's really going to be my key time frame. So then you said, okay, I got my time in mind, and I got my weather condition in mind. And then after that, for each weather risk and time period, there's a likelihood that that will occur. So let's zoom in a little bit here. So we already said our threshold was 1 inch per hour. Oops. And we cared about 6 to 7 a.m. or 7 to 8 a.m. So basically what you see here is overnight, oh yeah, really great chance we're going to get an inch per hour. In the middle of the night, not so much. Once we get into morning again, yeah, okay, now there's a chance that again we're going to be hitting that 1 inch per hour. But note here, by 10 a.m., all white. So not even a dusting of snow. Not a chance of a dusting of snow by the time you get to 10 a.m. So if you were looking at this tool in real time, the night before the closing decision, you might have said, okay, well, it looks like we're going to have some heavy snow during the morning commute. That's probably going to be bad for getting kids into school. But the snow is also going to stop by 10 a.m. So if we delay school by 2 hours, we'll be in a good spot. And of course, any meteorologist is only as good as his verification is. So in this particular case, I'm showing a radar from 9 a.m. and one at 10 a.m. And you don't need to be need to have a PhD in meteorology to just know, okay, the colors mean snow, where there aren't colors, there's nothing happening. And so Albany is kind of right here in east central New York. 9 a.m. there was still snow ongoing. 10 a.m. snow was done. So the reason that Cap City came to us is for this particular event, they canceled school all day. And by the time 9:30 rolled around, the sun was out. It was in mid-November, so the sun was, it was still somewhat warm out. Snow was melting. Roads were basically clear by 10 a.m. And they had lots of angry parents saying, why the heck did you cancel school? I have to take off work now. I have to find a babysitter. So there are big decisions here that are tough to make. And you can understand why they made this decision based on what we saw from New York City. So a lot of things might be sort of driven in by fear or misunderstanding. So I'm going to show, what this looks like right now. Obviously, we don't have a giant storm coming up, but that doesn't mean we can't look at it. Let me just full size here. And I should add too, I am more than happy to take questions at any point in this presentation. Now, 5 minutes from now, at the end, any point. If I don't see your question, you can type it. Feel free to read it off or interject otherwise. So here's the map of the New York State BOCES that I mentioned. So after this pilot project, we started doing an actual, for real live project with 6 or 7 BOCES around the state, including in the Cap region, where we took feedback and, okay, what are you looking at? What do you like to look at? What are your important thresholds for wind chill or heat index or whatever? So to look at this tool live, I'm going to click on this one. And I get dropped off at a spot where I see a map on the left and that table I talked about on the right. And so the way to read this is that there's always going to be a map on the left, and always a table on the right. And there's a couple different tools up here that I can use to bounce around and go between different things that I care about. So let's say I'm about to have a sporting event in 5 minutes. I'm really concerned that there might be lightning, or I'm concerned that it's about to start raining heavily. I can use this weather maps tool and change this plot on the left to a current radar. So I can see, okay, there's not really a whole lot going on. And on top of that, I can use all of these weather stations around here to check in on the current conditions. So here in Albany, in that area, the temperatures are roughly in the mid-40s. Peak winds are about 20 miles per hour. And here's the part that everyone loves, superintendents. I can look at what's going on outside. So I can click on this little thumbnail. this particular site located at Indian Ladder Farms in Voorheesville and see, yep, yeah, wow, that looks like a pretty nice day outside. If I have an event right now, I think we're all clear. If I cared about something else, like let's say I cared about wind chill, maybe my event can only function if there's a wind chill, say, above 40 degrees or 30 degrees. If my threshold is 40 degrees and my event's going to happen in an hour or so, let's say at 4 p.m., I'd say, well, I don't know, these light blues, an hour dipping below 40, that might be a rough time. So maybe I should cancel that event if that wasn't my threshold. So that's the idea of how to use that. And if I cared about snow today, which again, we're not anticipating a big snowstorm, but using that same logic, I'm just going to click on this to make it more zoomed in for everyone. Using that same logic that we had before, let's say I cared about an inch of snow, I'd say, okay, there's no chance of an inch of snow the rest of today, early morning. But if I cared about a few flurries, well, yeah, there's a chance of a few flurries tonight, if that was the thing that you cared about. So based on feedback, people said, hey, this is great, but we really need more than just looking out another 15 hours. So we added a couple different time ranges. We can go out to 2 days. If you want a really long view, can I even go out to about a week? So we gave those options, sort of stepping out in time, but then with the understanding that forecasts, 7 to 10 days are going to be less accurate than the forecast for tomorrow. It's winter, so we're focusing on winter. But if, like I said, this was the middle of summer and you were going to have football practice outside in the afternoon, and you cared about what kind of temperatures those kids were going to be in, what sort of heat index they were going to have, we can just switch this risk on the right. So this is that table, switch it to summertime. And now I'm looking at, zoom in here, things like how heavy is the rainfall? Where are my wind gusts? Is there a chance of lightning? What's the heat index like? So obviously we're not seeing any chance of a heat index above 90 today. But if this were in the summer and those were things that decided whether or not you could have that football practice or track meet, those would be the kind of things that you cared about. So luckily for the Cap region, they're pretty compact, but we also gave them the ability to jump around. So let's say you didn't care about Albany County, you cared about Saratoga County. We looked at Saratoga, now we're looking at a totally different set of maps and a different table that's unique to only Saratoga County. So based on the success of this, we've expanded this. The New York State DOT uses this. The MTA uses this. We've expanded to a number of utilities, and also the SUNY system. So I'm going to go over here on this other tab. It looks very similar to this one, but this is for the entire SUNY system. There are a whole bunch of colleges spread out and universities spread out all around the state. So this view kind of starts at a entire statewide view. And similarly, it works the same way, except now I'm at the state, and I can click on a little camera image here. Look at what's going on out there. This is the site that I showed earlier. There's the snow on the ground there. But in this case, SUNY can use this to go and drill down into any school that they care about. So depending on their type of university or college, here we're at University of Albany. I could go here, and now we're looking at a very similar dashboard that we had before. But if we were somewhere else, SUNY Cobblesville, Purchase College, it doesn't really matter. Buffalo State College, go here, and now suddenly we're out looking at Erie County, so basically city of Buffalo. And now we're looking at an entirely different thing. And as you can imagine, there's more of a chance of snow out there because they're right in the heart of the lake effect, essentially. So we've been looking at this on the dashboard, on a desktop view, but we also made this very friendly to mobile. So I'm just going to briefly unfull size my screen. And if I shrink my web browser, so I've really shrunk my web browser, this is what it would look like if you were on your mobile phone looking at this. So here you can have a much nicer accordion style menus. And obviously it's hard to read right now because it's not meant to be this small on a desktop, but if this were on your mobile phone, it would look like this, and you could easily scroll back and forth. And then the nice thing that we've heard from superintendents is that they have a big email chain, if they have a text chain, these things are just PNGs. You can click on one, you can save it, you can drag and drop it into your email. It has, okay, hey, I was made at 3:48 p.m. on this time. It's very clear. Everyone can say, here's what we're looking at. I'm looking at this. It says that there's a chance of an inch of snow between 6 and 7 tonight. It's all like the same thing. And that's really what they appreciate. So I think that is probably a good spot to stop and take some questions, because I'm sure there are a few questions, probably things I didn't touch on. I obviously glazed over how the weather sausage gets made here, but I'm happy to answer any of those questions as well. Sure.
Nick, I can ask a question. So obviously you showed us New York State. Now, is this possible to be created for people outside of New York State, anywhere in the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of this is New York State just because we're located in New York, and so we tend to work with people in New York more often. But all of the models, so the weather models that go into this, or any of the other plots I showed today, those are national weather models. And so it's not like they're only run for New York or only run for California or Colorado or something like that. If you were in Florida, you could do the same kind of thing. If you were in Washington, if you were in Idaho, it doesn't matter. You can do the same sort of thing. The only thing that isn't available necessarily everywhere is the New York State Mesonet, which is giving us these camera images and these real-time temperatures and wind speeds. And obviously, as the name implies, New York State Mesonet, that's a thing that's only in New York. Other states have similar weather observing networks that could try to reproduce that. So if we were in another state and that was something that was really, wanted, we could try to incorporate those. But if that didn't exist, you would still have radar, you would still have severe thunderstorm warnings, lightning, all of that kind of stuff is around in those other states. You just wouldn't necessarily have those observations.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any of our participants? I think we are set for right now. So Nick, if you want to continue.
Sure.
Actually, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So can anybody from any school district in New York State basically be able to look at this?
So what we did with the Capital Region BOCES, let me go back to their BOCES home. What we did for the Capital Region BOCES is this one is a Capital Region, and this is why we're specifically working with that one, is a vendor BOCES. And so they tried to get products, and then share them with other BOCES. And so to do that, they charged a pretty nominal fee. And so they charge, I think, other BOCES, I want to say $5,000 per BOCES. And so then oftentimes, if there were, 8 school districts in that BOCES, then they would split that $5,000 and pay for it. So that's what we ended up doing. And we're going to try to, we didn't do it last year because COVID and everyone was working from home and all that kind of stuff. We're going to try to restart it this year. And so if you're interested in that, or your BOCES, or if you're not in the BOCES, if you're interested in that, please reach out to me, because we can try to get you all set up. Like I said, we're working with the CAP region, so they'd probably be the ones to help facilitate that, but we'd be the ones creating the weather dashboard.
Okay, great, thanks.
One thing we did is for the different BOCES that were participating, you can understand they were sort of like, well, we're putting a couple $1,000s down for this, so we want to make sure that the users are the people that are basically helping to pay for it. So for instance, if I click on the City Oswego BOCES here, you'll see that there's a little basic username and password. So we just had the different BOCES like, hey, just suggest a username and password for us. Doesn't have to be any kind of fancy thing, but just so you can sort of protect, I guess, what you're investing in. So that's what we did for those. And I should also add too that these thresholds here, I didn't really mention this before, but these thresholds, these are arbitrary. There's no reason they have to be 1 inch of snowfall or wind chill below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. If there were specific thresholds that are unique to your area, so like for instance, if this were Florida, it doesn't make any sense to have a risk of minus 30-degree wind chills because that's probably never going to happen. Their wind chills are probably more like 50 or below or something like that. You would change it for that user just because they care about a different kind of thing. Okay, are there any more questions? So I could talk a little bit more about what goes into the forecast and sort of how they update. So basically, depending on the time range, there's a short range, medium range, and long range. We just pick the best model available at that time. And so for the short range, there's a weather model that the National Weather Service runs that is run every hour. It only goes out to about 18 hours. And so that's obviously not a good model to use if you're trying to forecast for 4 days from now. But it's really good hour to hour. So we use that model every hour. So these plots, this one, it's updated every hour. So not that you'd expect things to dramatically change from 1 hour to the next, but they will get updated every hour. And then this medium range one, there's another model that goes out to 60 hours, so about 2.5 days. But that's only run every 6 hours, not every hour. So every 6 hours, we update the medium range forecast out to about 2 days with a new set of plots. And then for long range, as you can imagine, there's a different set of models that work best at longer range forecasts. And so those update the ones we grab every 12 hours. And so every 12 hours, there's a new set of maps for that. Otherwise, stuff like radar, these maps get updated every couple of minutes. So every, I think it's 5 or 10 minutes, there's a new one. So if you had this, if you were a superintendent and you had a little, an office or a little mini command center with a couple of TVs or screens up, and you can just throw this up there, leave it up, it'll update automatically. So if we sit here long enough, this will just auto refresh and change itself to the latest image here. And then these observations will change with it. And then where we have observations, I haven't really gotten into this, but let me look at, let's pick what makes sense here. Let's pick a variable like wind chill. Where we have observations, we plot them in this case. And so you've probably been looking at these plots and thinking to yourself, well, it's not 2 to 3 p.m. right now. Why is 2 to 3 p.m. shown? And the reason that we do that is we purposefully plot the forecast for an hour or two ago because we know what actually happened an hour or two ago. So these purple numbers here, in this case, are what was actually true from this period, 2 to 3 p.m. So the idea being that if you were looking at the forecast, you could compare it to what actually happened. And if those two things were wildly different, you would say, this forecast is crap. I'm not going to trust it. I'm going to look elsewhere. Obviously, that happens pretty rarely, but it can happen from time to time. So in this case, if you were looking at what was the coldest wind chill from 2 to 3 p.m., generally mid-30s to 28 down here for year 10. Now this light blue is 30 to 40, and this medium dark blue here is 20 to 30. So yeah, that forecast is pretty much right on track. That's exactly what we saw for that period. So that's the way that we try to use current observations to help out. Sometimes we don't have those observations. So let's say we cared about something like visibility. You know, visibility might not be a really deciding factor, but sometimes in really foggy weather, or if it's snowing and you're worrying about whiteout conditions, we don't necessarily have fancy visibility measurements everywhere, but we do have cameras. And so if you're worried about visibility, you can always check the camera and obviously get a sense of, can I see a long ways? And yes, I can. That's great. So really, this is pretty moldable to the geography that we're considering, the type of weather they experience, and the observations that they have available, if any. And in New York, we're pretty spoiled because we have the best weather observing network in the country. That was installed after Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. So we're spoiled in that way, in ways that other states don't have access to. But in principle, you can do the same thing for any other state, for any observation.
Nick, I'm not sure if you were going to mention this, but could you possibly go over the transportation map a little bit? Because school districts and campuses, it might be important to see the specific roads for people coming in and out of the campus, or obviously where the bus routes are.
Yeah. So right. Thank you for reminding me, because I meant to actually talk about this. Before. So depending on the organization. So for BOCES that I showed before, these maps. If I do the short range. Some of these maps have the road network on, and some of them have which is right here, and some of them have the school district boundaries, and that again was sort of a choice by the different organizations. But for SUNY, they said, like, yeah, let's just have the road network on everything. And so luckily for us, we are partnered with this organization called Global Weather Corporation, and they make road forecasts specifically. So as you can imagine, the DOT likes this, but it's also really good for people who are making decisions that are based partly or almost entirely on whether or not people can use the roads. And so some of these maps here are basically the expected road conditions, the worst case road conditions, and then road temperatures. So if I click on expected road conditions, I'm going to click on this and just sort of zoom in just a little bit so people see it. But basically what this shows is hour by hour. If it's all white, that's great. Nothing of interest. The colors correspond to this key down here. And so the idea is that if it were lots of snow, we'd see lots of blue. And if it were kind of melty snow, we'd see purple. As it is right now, we see this gray or green. And basically that means that the roads are almost dry, or maybe there's a little bit of wet on them. But let's say that we were anticipating a huge snowstorm overnight. Well, maybe you see lots of blues in Erie County tomorrow, and you would say, well, I don't know, I don't think the bus is going to be able to drive that if it's still really snowy. And then there's it's a worst case. So basically, if kind of the forecast was a little bit worse than we thought, if the DOT or other groups weren't pre-treating with salt, or plows weren't quite ready, what's my worst case? And that's what this shows. And so here you can see there's lots of blue, and that means snow or ice. So that's one way that we try to do that. And then another way is we have a different table here for roadway. So I'm just going to click on that one here. It has some of the same things like snowfall and freezing rain, but other things that are important like visibility, ground temperature. This is important for things like, are we going to get black ice overnight? Is the snow going to melt when it hits the ground? Maybe we're getting a lot of snow, but the temperature is 36 degrees and the snow is not really going to stick. So that's what this is trying to help out with. So we try to add in some other transportation tools where possible. So you can imagine how that might be helpful to groups like the DOT, but also groups who rely on the road network to do what they need to do.
So we have a question in the chat. So is this a public or a free resource? And so you sort of mentioned a little bit that some of the BOCES have access to it and others don't. So if someone is not part of a BOCES, how would they be able to get access? And I'm assuming there's a cost associated with that if you're not part of a system that already pays for the service.
Yeah. So if you're not part of the BOCES, I don't really think that's a problem, because I think the BOCES are, it's my understanding that they're actually trying to transition to doing services beyond literally other high schools and grade schools. So community colleges, or other types of things. So if you are an organization that's not a school, I would say either feel free to reach out to me, which you don't have my email address. I'm just going to, it's right here, and Bassill@albany.edu. Please reach out to me with what you're interested in, what kind of organization you are. It's possible we already have something we can just share, or it's possible we can start up something new, or just kind of roll you into whatever we're going to end up doing with OCs. But yeah, please reach out. It's hard to give a specific answer without knowing exactly what kind of organization it is. But if you're a state government, that also helps out. We do a few of these kind of things for the state government just because they fund us. So to share some tools.
And now some of the pictures obviously come from the New York Mesonet sites. And now Mesonet itself is a public website that people could go on and see the pictures or the live cameras for that if they wanted to see like live weather.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So I'm going to go to nysmesonet.org. And this is, like you said, this is where that data comes from, where those pictures came from. We're just using it here. But here's a map of stations across the state. It automatically knows that my closest station is Voorheesville based on where I am. But you can change your stations if you want to. I can go to forecast. And now here I'm looking at Voorheesville. I can click on this camera image, see what's going on. It's getting close to sunset now. But if you're a weather nerd like me, you can really dive into the weather data here. If you want to look at the past weather, there are somewhere here. There's a media graph somewhere. Sorry, there it is. If you want to look at the past days worth of weather, there's a little handy chart here. You can kind of scroll back 5 minutes by 5 minutes and say, wow, at 8:05 p.m. last night, the temperature was 43.3 degrees. That's the sorts of things you care about. This is free and online. No password needed or anything like that.
Are there any other questions?
What are some things that are not implemented in this program that you would like to see in the future, or things that you'd like to kind of tweak and add to it as you use it?
That's a great.
I'm just curious.
Oh no, that's a great question. So yeah, there's a few things. So starting with the kind of lowest hanging fruit from my perspective, if I go, let's say I go to medium range here, and I'm going to go to snowfall for 3 hours. You'll note here I say a 10-to-1 ratio of snowfall. And so really what that's saying is if you get a 1/10 of an inch of, if you melted the snow and it was a 1/10 of an inch of liquid, and we knew it was going to fall snow, right now I'm saying that's going to be an inch of snow. So 10-to-1 meaning 10 times 0.1 gets you 1. And why that's important is that most weather models just spit out the liquid part of the snow, and you have to kind of convert it to an actual snowfall. So 10-to-1 is what a lot of people use. But that's not perfect, because we know that in January, maybe we get a really dry snow. Here in early November, if we got snow, like that loop I showed in the beginning, it's going to be a really heavy, wet snow. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing soon is starting to use a climatological snow. So basically saying, here in November, here's the ratio we get. just to make that a little bit more accurate. Thinking bigger, we actually just hired someone who my hope is can sort of redesign this, and not that it would necessarily look different, because I do think it's pretty functional, but to allow people to maybe choose their thresholds on the fly. So say you don't have to rely, let's say for some reason you wanted a different threshold here. You cared about 1.5 inches of snow per hour, or you cared about 25 mile per hour gusts or something like that. And you could do that on the fly and make that happen without sending me an email waiting for me to change something, and then maybe someone else gets mad because I changed it or whatever. So those are kind of the two big things. And then really just better using available weather data. We're just using the New York State Mesonet right now, and I say just, but there's a lot there. But incorporating other weather data like the Albany Airport or LaGuardia if you're on Long Island or something like that.
Great. We have a question in the chat. They want to know, is this already built out for other SUNY campuses to use, or do they have to opt in? Because obviously on the drop down we saw that the SUNYs were in there. So can SUNYs access it, or how do they access it? That's the question.
If you are a SUNY, you have access to it. So this is just sorry, I'm trying to move my little. Okay. So basically every single SUNY entity is here, even Empire State SUNYs. So like I went to Empire State Watertown on looking at Jefferson County. So if you are a SUNY, by kind of, let me take all of the, this was made possible through working with SUNY Central. And I can put this website in the chat. So there's no cost if you're a SUNY. And I will say, just email me because, to be honest, I need to look up. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. I need to look up what the username and password are. I haven't touched this in a very long time. I think it was made by SUNY Central, so I can share that with you if you're from another SUNY. I know just looking at kind of usage statistics, obviously Albany uses it, Binghamton, New Paltz, I think Queensbury, a few others have used it semi-recently, probably some in Western New York too, based on this one.
Okay, great. So if you're a SUNY, just email Nick and he can give you the username and password because SUNY system already buys into this. So you'll be able to access it in case snow is coming soon in your area.
That's right.
Are there any other questions anyone has? I'm looking in the chat for anything. Nick did put his email in chat. Nick, is it okay if people think of questions later if they could email you?
Absolutely, yes. Definitely, yeah. Yep, that's my email. So yeah, please reach out anytime. Very happy to help out.
Great. Thank you. Jerry, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Nick, for a wonderful presentation. Very informative. I certainly will be sending you my requesting the password to access. I think that would be actually quite fun to play around with it and also to have that level of information available, especially when you live in the Northeast. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's edTrends session. And again, I'd like to thank our presenter, Nick Bassill, for his informative presentation. And until next week, health and happiness on edTrends.